A wealthy man leaves his young son, who uses a wheelchair on a deserted road. The boy cries out, begging his father not to do this. Years later, the outcome is nothing short of shocking. The sleek silver Mercedes sparkled under the blazing afternoon sun, its polished surface mirroring the barren landscape that stretched endlessly in both directions. Inside the car, 10-year-old Ethan Carter clutched a leather seat with shaky hands, his heart racing as his father's icy words filled the luxurious interior. "This is for the best," said Daniel Carter, his voice emotionless, as he brought the car to a halt. The successful businessman, dressed sharply in a tailor's suit, avoided his son's pleading eyes in the rearview mirror. "Please, Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "I'll do better, I promise. I won't ask for anything else." His wheelchair, folded in the trunk, was a constant reminder of the condition that made him, in his father's eyes, an unsuitable heir to the Carter fortune. The car door opened with a soft click, and Daniel stepped out, his expensive shoes stirring up small clouds of dust from the abandoned road. Without a word, he walked to the trunk, retrieved the wheelchair, and set it up with mechanical precision. Each movement was deliberate, as if he were handling a business deal rather than abandoning his only child. "Dad!" Ethan's voice grew more desperate as his father lifted him from the back seat and placed him in the wheelchair with practiced ease. The boy's legs, which had never worked since birth, dangled limply as he was moved. "Dad, please don't do this. I'll study harder. I'll stay out of sight when your friends visit. I won't embarrass you anymore." Daniel adjusted his tie, a nervous habit from years of high-stakes business meetings. But this wasn't negotiation. It was his son, begging for the love he had been denied since birth. "Someone will find you," Daniel said, his words carried away by the hot wind sweeping across the empty road. "The Carter name is not meant for—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. Ethan reached out, his small hand clutching his father's sleeve. "I'm sorry I'm not the son you wanted," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry Mom's not here. I'm sorry I can't walk. Please, Dad, don't leave me." For a moment, something flickered across Daniel's face. A shadow of doubt, perhaps even pain. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same mask of indifference he had worn for years. Without another word, he turned and walked back to the car. Ethan watched helplessly as his father slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and the Mercedes began to move. "Dad!" he screamed, his voice filled with desperation. "Please, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." But the car continued to shrink into the distance, leaving nothing but a trail of dust and the echo of a child's shattered heart. Ethan sat alone in his wheelchair, the sun beating down mercilessly, as the reality of his situation began to sink in. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, empty except for the occasional tumbleweed rolling across the cracked asphalt. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. Ethan's tears had dried on his cheeks, leaving salty streaks that itched in the dry air. His throat was raw from crying, and thirst began to gnaw at him. Yet he stayed where his father had left him, clinging to the faint hope that the Mercedes would return, that this was all some terrible test. As shadows stretched across the landscape, the sound of an approaching vehicle broke the oppressive silence. But it wasn't the familiar hum of his father's luxury car. Instead, it was the rumble of an old pickup truck, its faded blue paint visible beneath a layer of desert dust. The truck slowed as it approached, and Ethan could see two figures in the cab. His heart raced with a mix of fear and hope as the vehicle stopped beside him. The passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out, her face filled with concern. "Oh, my God, Mike," she called to her husband. "There's a child out here all alone." She approached Ethan carefully, her weathered face kind but cautious. "Sweetheart, are you okay? What are you doing out here by yourself?" Ethan looked up at her, then back at the empty road where his father's car had disappeared. In that moment, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, he realized his life would never be the same. The Grand Carter Mansion had always felt more like a museum than a home. In the weeks leading up to that day on the desert road, Ethan had spent countless hours wheeling through its endless hallways, surrounded by priceless artwork that seemed to mock him with their perfection. Each painting, each sculpture, represented the flawless beauty his father sought in every aspect of life. Now, As Linda Thompson gently helped Ethan settle into her cozy living room, the contrast couldn't have been more striking. The warm, comfortable couch, the family photos covering the walls, the faint scent of fresh-baked bread. Everything spoke of warmth and life, concepts that had been foreign in the cold marble halls of his former home. "You must be hungry, sweetheart," Linda said, her voice soft and caring. She exchanged a worried glance with her husband, Mike, who stood in the doorway, his rough hands fidgeting with his worn baseball cap. "I just baked some cookies. Would you like one?" Ethan nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on a family portrait hanging above the fireplace. It showed Linda and Mike surrounded by children of various ages, all smiling at the camera. The happiness in their faces seemed almost alien to him, a reminder of everything he'd never had. "We should call the police," Mike muttered to his wife as she passed him on her way to the kitchen. "A child doesn't end up alone on that road by accident." Linda placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Let him eat first, Mike. Let him feel safe." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Ethan alone with Mike, who awkwardly settled into a nearby armchair. "You like baseball, kid?" Mike asked, noticing Ethan's gaze drift to a collection of Little League trophies on a shelf. The question, though well-meaning, sent Ethan's mind spinning back to a painful memory from just 2 weeks earlier. He had been watching the Carter Industries Company baseball game from the sidelines, his wheelchair parked under the shade of a large oak tree. His father, as always, was the star of the show, his natural athleticism drawing admiration from employees and board members alike. During a break between innings, Ethan had wheeled himself closer to the dugout, hoping to catch his father's attention. "Dad," he had called out, waving a baseball glove he convinced his nurse to buy him. "Could you teach me how to catch? I've been practicing with Sarah, and she says I have good hand-eye coordination." Daniel Carter had frozen mid-conversation with the company's vice president, his shoulders visibly tensing. Without turning around, he'd said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Not now, Ethan. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something important?" The vice president had laughed uncomfortably, and Ethan had retreated to a spot under the tree, the unused glove lying limp in his lap. That night, he'd overheard his father on the phone. "It's getting worse, Mom. He keeps trying to be normal. I can't handle it anymore." The constant reminder of what happened to Claire. "Kid," Mike's voice pulled Ethan back to present. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but we're here to listen when you're ready." Linda returned with a plate of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of cold milk. The simple gesture, so normal, so maternal, made Ethan's throat tighten with emotion. When was the last time someone had brought him freshly baked cookies? His nurses and caretakers had always been professional but distant, following his father's unspoken rule to keep emotional distance. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. He took a cookie with trembling hands, its warmth seeping into his cold fingers. The first bite brought tears to his eyes, not because of the taste, but because of the care it represented. "Oh, sweetheart," Linda murmured, sitting beside him on the couch. She reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and when Ethan didn't pull away, she gently wrapped an arm around his shoulders. The simple touch of comfort broke something inside him, and suddenly he was sobbing into her shoulder, years of loneliness and rejection pouring out in great, heaving gasps. Mike stood up abruptly, his face dark with anger as he pieced together the implications of Ethan's reaction to basic kindness. "I'm calling the police," he said firmly, but Linda caught his eye and shook her head slightly. "Tomorrow," she mouthed over Ethan's head. "Let him rest tonight." As the sun set outside the Thompsons' modest home, casting long shadows through the windows, Ethan gradually cried himself to sleep in Linda's arms. It was the first time in his memory that someone had held him while he cried. The first time. He hadn't been told to man up or stop being difficult. In his last moment of consciousness, as Linda hummed a soft lullaby and stroked his hair, Ethan realized something his young mind couldn't quite put into words. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of the Thompsons' guest room, painting unfamiliar patterns on the wall. Ethan blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the absence of his automated blinds and the usual morning routine of nurses and caregivers. Instead of the antiseptic silence of the Carter mansion, he heard the gentle clatter of dishes and muffled voices from somewhere below. Linda's voice drifted up the stairs, accompanied by the aroma of coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. "Mike, we need to handle this carefully. Did you see how he responded to basic kindness last night? That child has been through things we can't even imagine." "I know, Linda," Mike's deeper voice replied, heavy with concern. "But we can't just pretend we didn't find an abandoned child on Route 23. The authorities need to be involved." Ethan's hands gripped the worn quilt covering him, his mind racing. The authorities would mean questions, investigations, and inevitably they would contact his father. Daniel Carter's influence extended far and wide. Would he convince them that Ethan was better off in his care? Would anyone believe a 10-year-old story over that of a prominent businessman? A soft knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Ethan, are you awake, honey?" Linda's voice was gentle, lacking the professional detachment he was accustomed to from his caretakers. "I've made pancakes if you're hungry." "Yes, I'm awake," he responded, his voice scratchy from yesterday's crying. "But I can't." He glanced at his wheelchair, positioned just out of reach from the bed. Linda entered the room, her face brightening with understanding. "Oh, let me help you with that. Mike and I have some experience. Our nephew Marco uses a wheelchair, too. He stays with us sometimes during summer breaks." As she helped him into his chair with surprising competence, Ethan noticed photos on the dresser he hadn't seen the night before. They showed a teenage boy in a wheelchair surrounded by laughing children, clearly part of the family rather than separate from it. "Marco teaches wheelchair basketball now," Linda mentioned casually, adjusting Ethan's footrest with practiced ease. "He's actually coming to visit next week. Would you like to meet him?" The question caught Ethan off guard. In his previous life, interactions with other wheelchair users had been strictly limited to physical therapy sessions, always under his father's watchful, disapproving eye. The idea of someone like him living a normal, active life seemed almost impossible. Downstairs, the kitchen was a warm chaos of morning activity. Two children he recognized from the family portrait, probably around 13 and 8, were arguing good-naturedly over the last chocolate chip pancake. Mike sat at the head of the table, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed what looked like homework assignments. "Maria, Carlos, this is Ethan," Linda introduced, wheeling him to an empty space at the table. "He's going to be staying with us for a while." The children barely paused in their pancake negotiations, offering casual highs, as if wheelchair-using guests were an everyday occurrence. No stares, no awkward questions, no carefully masked pity. Just normal breakfast table chaos. "You teach?" Ethan asked Mike, noticing the red pen in his hand. Mike looked up, smiling. "6th grade, over at Pine Grove Elementary. Been doing it for 20 years now." He paused, something flickering across his face. "Actually, we should probably discuss school for you too. You must have been enrolled somewhere before." The unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavy with implications. Ethan stared at his empty plate, memories of his previous school experiences threatening to overwhelm him. The private academies his father had chosen, where he was treated like a delicate piece of china, segregated from the other students. For his own good. "I can do normal school," he said quickly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I mean, I'm good at math and reading. I just need help getting around sometimes." Linda and Mike exchanged glances. "Of course you can do normal school," Mike said firmly. "Pine Grove has several students with different needs. We'll make it work." The rest of breakfast passed in a blur of new experiences. Maria showed him how she and Carlos had developed a system for sharing the last pancake, cutting it into precisely equal portions, while Linda quietly made note of which foods he seemed to enjoy most. It was all so normal, so family-like, that Ethan found himself waiting for the other shoe to drop. That moment came with the sound of a car, door, slamming outside. Mike stood up, his expression tightening. "That'll be Officer Rodriguez." "Linda, why don't you take the kids to get ready for school?" Ethan's heart began to race, but before he could panic, Linda's hand found his shoulder. "Would you like me to stay with you while you talk to the officer? You don't have to do this alone." The words hit him like a physical force. You don't have to do this alone. How many times had he faced doctors, therapists, and school administrators with only paid staff by his side? How many nights had he lain awake, trying to be strong, because no one else would be strong for him? Please, he whispered, his hand finding Linda's. Please stay. As Officer Rodriguez's footsteps approached the front door, Ethan sat straighter in his wheelchair. For the first time in his life, he wasn't facing authority figures as the perfectly polished, perfectly controlled Carter heir. He was just a boy, scared and hurting, but somehow stronger because someone was finally on his side. Officer Rodriguez's interview lasted over 2 hours, during which Ethan recounted the events that had led to his abandonment. The officer's face remained professionally neutral, but his pen pressed harder into his notepad at certain points in the story. Linda never left Ethan's side, her steady presence anchoring him when memories threatened to overwhelm his composure. We'll need to conduct a formal investigation, Rodriguez explained, closing his notebook. Given the prominence of the parties involved, this will need to be handled carefully. He paused, looking directly at Ethan. But I want you to know that what happened to you was wrong. No child deserved to be abandoned, no matter the circumstances. After the officer left, promising to return with social services representatives, Ethan felt drained. The weight of having spoken his truth out loud left him exhausted, yet somehow lighter. Linda seemed to understand without words, wheeling him to the backyard where a small garden offered a peaceful retreat. My mother always said gardens were good for the soul, she mentioned, positioning his chair near a patch of bright yellow marigolds. When things get too overwhelming, sometimes it helps to just sit and watch things grow. The afternoon sun warmed Ethan's face as he observed a butterfly landing on nearby flowers. In the Carter mansion's meticulously maintained gardens, insects were considered pests to be eliminated. Here, they were part of the natural order, contributing to the beauty rather than detracting from it. What's going to happen now? He asked finally, his voice small against the backdrop of chirping birds and rustling leaves. Linda took a moment before responding, her hands busy with garden tools. Well, legally there will be investigations and hearings, but right here, right now, you're going to be part of our family for as long as you need to be. We'll take it one day at a time. But what if he comes back? The question that had been haunting Ethan since the previous day finally escaped. What if my father decides he made a mistake? Linda set down her trowel, turning to face him fully. Ethan, listen to me carefully. What your father did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a wrong choice. And while I can't promise you exactly what will happen next, I can promise you this. Mike and I will fight for you. The afternoon transitioned into evening, and the Thompson household settled into its normal routine. Carlos showed Ethan his collection of comic books, explaining elaborate storylines with infectious enthusiasm. Maria helped him navigate the house's layout, pointing out which areas might be tricky for his wheelchair and suggesting solutions with the casual expertise of someone used to considering accessibility. During dinner, Mike brought up the subject of school. I spoke with Principal Bennett today. She's excited to have you join us at Pine Grove, and we've already started arranging the necessary accommodations. Would you like to visit the campus tomorrow? See how you feel about it. The offer was presented so naturally, so different from the lengthy evaluations and special arrangements that had characterized his previous educational experiences. Really? Just like that. Just like that, Mike confirmed, passing him a bowl of mashed potatoes. Education is a right, not a privilege. We'll make whatever adjustments are needed, but you'll be treated like any other student. Later that night, as Linda helped him prepare for bed, Ethan noticed something on the nightstand that hadn't been there the previous evening. A family photo album. I thought you might like to learn more about us, she explained. And maybe, someday you'll want to add your own pictures to it. The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to his eyes. In the Carter mansion, photos of Ethan had been conspicuously absent from a carefully curated family galleries. His father had always claimed it was to protect their privacy, but Ethan had understood the truth. He didn't fit the perfect image Daniel Carter wanted to project. I've never been in a family album before, he admitted, his fingers tracing the worn leather cover. Linda's hand stilled in the act of turning down his bed covers. For a moment, She seemed to be fighting back her own emotions. Then she sat on the edge of his bed, opening the album to its first page. Well then, let me tell you about the time Carlos decided to give himself a haircut right before his kindergarten photos. As Linda's warm voice filled the room with stories of family mishaps, achievements, and everyday moments, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The pain of his father's rejection was still there, a wound that would take time to heal. But alongside it, something new was taking root. The first tentative sprouts of belonging, nurtured by the simple act of being included in a family story. Through the window, the same stars that had witnessed his abandonment now watched over a different scene. A boy learning that family isn't defined by blood or perfection, but by the choice to love and accept someone exactly as they are. Pine Grove Elementary looked nothing like the prestigious private academies Ethan had attended before. Instead of imposing stone facades and manicured lawns, the building was a cheerful mix of brick and colorful murals, with children's artwork prominently displayed in every window. As Mike wheeled him up the accessible ramp to the main entrance, Ethan noticed something else different. The other students barely gave his wheelchair a second glance. Principal Bennett met them in the front office, her warm smile matching the welcoming atmosphere of her school. "Welcome to Pine Grove, Ethan. We're so excited to have you join us." She spoke directly to him, not over his head to Mike, as most adults tended to do. "Mr. Martinez tells me you're quite good at math," she continued, leading them down a hallway decorated with student projects. "We have an excellent mathematics program here, and Mrs. Chin is always looking for enthusiastic students." Ethan absorbed every detail as they toured the school. The classrooms were arranged in pods with wide doorways that easily accommodated his wheelchair. In the art room, he noticed adjustable height tables and specialized tools. "Marco, that's my nephew I told you about, helped us design some of our accessible spaces," Mike explained proudly. The music room caught Ethan's attention in an unexpected way. Through the open door, he could see students gathered around various instruments, some sitting, some standing, all participating in their own way. A boy with arm braces was playing a modified drum set, his face lit up with joy. "Ah, you're interested in music." Principal Bennett noticed his lingering gaze. "Mr. Rodriguez, our music teacher, believes every student can be a musician. He's quite innovative in adapting instruments to different needs." Before Ethan could respond, a bell rang, and the hallways filled with students changing classes. Instead of the careful separation he was used to, where he'd always been kept apart for his safety, he found himself in the middle of the controlled chaos. A girl with purple hair waved as she passed, calling out, "Hey, Mr. M," to Mike. A boy on crutches navigated the crowd with practiced ease, joking with his friends. "Would you like to start tomorrow?" Principal Bennett asked as they concluded the tour. "We've already prepared a desk for you in Mr. Martinez's class, and our staff is ready to provide any support you need." Ethan looked up at Mike, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Yes," he answered, surprising himself with his certainty. "I'd like that very much." The next morning brought a mix of anxiety and excitement. Linda helped him choose clothes from the new wardrobe they'd purchased. Simple, comfortable items so different from the formal uniforms his father had insisted upon. As they pulled up to the school, Ethan spotted Carlos waiting by the entrance with a group of friends. "Hey, Ethan," Carlos called out, waving enthusiastically. "Come meet my friends." The introduction was casual, natural. "This is Ethan. He's staying with us," Carlos explained simply. "He's awesome at Space Rangers. He totally destroyed my high score last night." Just like that, Ethan found himself part of a group conversation about video games and favorite superheroes. No one asked about his wheelchair. No one treated him differently. When the bell rang, a boy named Miguel naturally fell into step beside him as they headed to class. Mike's classroom was everything Ethan hadn't known education could be. Instead of rigid rows of desks, the space was arranged in collaborative clusters. Mike taught with infectious enthusiasm, encouraging discussion and questions. When Ethan correctly solved a particularly challenging math problem, his new classmates spontaneously applauded. During music class, Mr. Rodriguez approached Ethan with genuine interest. "I hear you've never played an instrument before," he said, wheeling over a cart of various options. Would you like to explore some possibilities? Music isn't about what you can't do. It's about discovering what you can. The teacher demonstrated different instruments, modified with adaptive accessories when needed. When Ethan expressed interest in the keyboard, Mr. Rodriguez showed him how the sustain pedal could be operated by hand instead of foot. Music finds a way, he said with a wink. It always finds a way. Lunch in the cafeteria could have been intimidating, but Carlos had already saved him a spot at his regular table. The conversation flowed naturally, including him in debates about the best superhero movies and plans for the upcoming school science fair. When Ethan dropped his fork, Miguel simply handed him another one. No fuss or awkward attention drawn to the moment. In art class, Mrs. Peterson introduced him to adaptive art tools that made painting easier with his specific motor skills. Art is about expression, not perfection, she said, helping him adjust his grip on a modified brush. Just let the colors speak for you. By the end of the day, Ethan's head was spinning with new experiences and possibilities. As Linda picked him up, Mike had to stay late for a staff meeting. She found him animated in a way she hadn't seen before. And then in music class, he explained excitedly on the drive home, Mr. Rodriguez showed me how I could play the keyboard with these special attachments. He says I have good rhythm, and maybe next week he can show me some basic chords. Linda smiled at his enthusiasm in the rear-view mirror. It sounds like you had a wonderful first day. Did anything surprise you the most? Ethan thought for a moment, watching the familiar streets of his new neighborhood pass by. I think it was that nobody tried to make things perfect. They just made things possible. The profound simplicity of his observation hung in the air as they pulled into the driveway. For the first time in his life, Ethan had experienced education not as a carefully controlled environment designed to accommodate his limitations, but as an open invitation to explore his possibilities. The weeks at Pine Grove fell into a comfortable rhythm, each day bringing new discoveries and small victories. Ethan found himself looking forward to school, especially music class, where Mr. Rodriguez's encouragement was helping him discover talents he never knew he possessed. But it wasn't until a rainy Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after his arrival at the Thompson home, that everything changed. Linda was cleaning out the garage with Ethan, helping to sort through boxes of old belongings. We're like squirrels, she laughed, opening another dusty carton. We keep everything, swearing we'll need it someday. As she moved aside a stack of old magazines, Ethan spotted something intriguing, the worn neck of what appeared to be a guitar case protruding from behind some boxes. What's that? He asked, pointing. Linda's expression softened with recognition. Oh, that's Grandpa Joe's old guitar, she said, carefully extracting the case and laying it across Ethan's lap. Mike's father. He used to play at all our family gatherings. The house would fill with music, and everyone would sing along, even if they didn't know the words. Ethan ran his fingers over the worn leather case, fascination evident in his eyes. What happened to him? He moved on to a better place a few years ago, Linda said gently, helping Ethan open the case. But he always said this guitar had more songs left in it, waiting for the right person to find them. The instrument inside was beautiful in its imperfection, a classic acoustic guitar with subtle, wear marks that spoke of years of loving use. The wood gleamed warmly even in the garage's fluorescent lighting, and Ethan could see his reflection in its polished surface. Would you like to hold it? Linda asked, noticing his entranced expression. Ethan hesitated. But I can't play it. I mean, don't you need to use your legs to hold it properly? Linda's eyes sparkled with that familiar look that meant she had an idea. Wait here, she said, disappearing into the house. She returned moments later with several throw pillows. With careful adjustments, she created a support system that allowed the guitar to rest securely across Ethan's lap. There, she said, stepping back to examine her handiwork. Grandpa Joe always said music finds a way to those who need it. Maybe this is your way. Ethan tentatively touched the strings, producing a soft, discordant sound that nevertheless sent a shiver of excitement through him. It was nothing like the precise electronic notes of the keyboard in music class. This was organic, raw, alive. I could show you a few basic things, Linda offered. I'm no expert, but Grandpa Joe taught me enough to accompany simple songs. For the next hour, Linda demonstrated how to hold his hands and how to form basic chords. Though some positions were challenging with his specific motor skills, they discovered that by adapting the traditional techniques, Ethan could produce clear, beautiful notes. You know, Linda said as they worked, Grandpa Joe used to say that the best music comes from the heart, not the hands. He believed every scratch and dent in his guitar added to its voice, made its story richer. As the afternoon wore on, Maria and Carlos were drawn to garage by the sounds of practice. Instead of teasing or showing impatience with the beginner's efforts, they settled in to watch, occasionally offering encouragement or suggesting songs they knew. Mom used to sing in the church choir, Maria shared, sitting cross-legged on a nearby box. Maybe you two could practice together. Linda blushed. Oh, I haven't sung properly in years. Please, Ethan asked, surprising himself with his eagerness. In his previous life, showing enthusiasm for anything had often led to disappointment. But here, in this garage filled with dusty treasures and family memories, he felt safe to want things. Linda's voice, when she began to sing, was clear and warm, wrapping around Ethan's simple chord progressions like a comfortable blanket. She chose an old folk song, one with easy repetitions that allowed Ethan to anticipate the changes. As they played and sang, Mike appeared in the garage doorway, drawn by the music. His eyes grew wet as he recognized his father's guitar, but his smile was bright. Without a word, he pulled up another box and joined the impromptu audience. The rain continued to fall outside, creating a gentle percussion to accompany their practice session. Ethan's fingers were beginning to tire and use the string's resistance, but he didn't want to stop. Each note, however imperfect, felt like a small act of rebellion against every time he'd been told to be quiet, to not draw attention, to accept his limitations. You know, Mike said during a break, Grandpa Joe always insisted that music was the purest form of magic. It can heal hearts, he'd say, and build bridges between souls. I never fully understood what he meant until now. Ethan looked down at the guitar in his lap, this beautiful instrument that had somehow found its way to him. In the polished wood, he caught a glimpse of his reflection again, but this time he saw something different. Not a boy defined by what he couldn't do, but an artist discovering what he could. Could we do this again tomorrow? He asked, hope fragile but present in his voice. Linda smiled, exchanging a look with Mike. I think Grandpa Joe's guitar has been waiting in this garage long enough. Why don't we find a proper place for it in your room? As they carefully packed up the instrument, Ethan realized that for the first time since being left on that desert road, he wasn't thinking about his father or the life he'd lost. Instead, his mind was full of melodies, possibilities, and the warmth of belonging to a family who saw him not as a burden to bear, but as a song waiting to be sung. The social worker's arrival was announced by the crunch of tires on the Thompsons' gravel driveway. Ethan was in the middle of a guitar lesson with Linda, his fingers finally mastering the transition between C and G chords when the doorbell rang. The sound sent his heart racing. Official visits had never brought good news in his experience. It's okay, honey, Linda reassured him, helping him position his wheelchair. Miss Carter is here to help. She's on your side. But Ethan couldn't help noticing how she squared her shoulders as if preparing for battle. Miss Carter was different from the polished, intimidating social workers his father had occasionally paraded to the Carter mansion. Her suit was slightly rumpled, her curly hair escaping its professional bun, and her smile reached her eyes when she greeted Ethan. I've been reviewing your case, she said, settling into the living room couch. And I have to tell you, Ethan, you're very brave for speaking up about what happened. Ethan's hands twisted in his lap. Has my father said anything? Miss Carter's expression tightened slightly. Mr. Carter has retained legal counsel and issued a statement claiming there's been a misunderstanding. He says he left you in the care of a trusted employee who was supposed to meet you at that location. The lie hit Ethan like a physical blow. In his mind, he heard his father's last words again, felt the desert wind on his face as a Mercedes disappeared into the distance. Linda's hand found his shoulder, grounding him in the present. That's not what happened, he said, his voice stronger than he expected. He left me there alone. He said the Carter name wasn't meant for. He couldn't finish the sentence. I believe you, Miss Carter said firmly, and we have evidence supporting your account. The gas station security camera 3 miles down the road caught Mr. Carter's car passing through, alone, both before and after the time you were left there. Mike, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, spoke up. What happens now? There will be a hearing next month, Miss Carter explained. Given the high-profile nature of the case, the court wants to proceed carefully. In the meantime, Ethan will remain here with you, if that's agreeable to everyone. Of course it is, Linda responded immediately. Ethan's family now. The word family sparked something in Ethan's memory. What about my grandmother and my aunts? Do they know what happened? Miss Carter consulted her notes. We've reached out to your paternal grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Carter. She declined to be involved at this time. Ethan nodded, unsurprised but still hurt. His grandmother had always been his father's strongest ally in maintaining the perfect Carter image. She'd been the one to suggest sending him to boarding school when he was 8, though his father had ultimately decided against it. I have some other news, Miss Carter continued, her tone gentler. We've located your maternal grandparents. The room seemed to freeze. Ethan had never known anything about his mother's family. His father had forbidden any mention of them after her passing. They live in Arizona, Miss Carter explained. They've been searching for you for years. Your father's lawyers kept them from making contact, but now they very much want to meet you. Only if you're comfortable, of course. Ethan felt overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. Anger at his father's deception, curiosity about this unknown family, and fear of more rejection. Almost unconsciously, his hands reached for Grandpa Joe's guitar, which had become a source of comfort over the past weeks. Linda noticed the gesture. Why don't we take a break? Ethan has his first school music performance tomorrow, and he needs to practice. Miss Carter smiled understandingly. Of course, we don't need to decide anything today. Just think about it, Ethan. Your maternal grandparents have written you a letter. When you're ready to read it. After she left, Ethan remained quiet, absently strumming the guitar strings. The Thompson family gave him space, understanding his need to process. It wasn't until after dinner, as Linda was helping him prepare for bed, that he finally spoke. What if they're disappointed too? My mother's parents. What if they see me and feel the same way my father does? Linda sat on the edge of his bed, her face serious. Ethan, listen to me. Your father's actions reflect on him, not on you. You are an amazing young man, talented, kind, and stronger than you know. Anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing someone truly special. She picked up Grandpa Joe's guitar, which had taken up permanent residence in Ethan's room. You know what I see when I watch you play? I see someone who doesn't give up, who finds his own way to make music even when it's challenging. That kind of determination, that's beautiful. Ethan ran his fingers over the guitar's worn surface. When I play, it's like I can say things I don't have words for. All the scary feelings, all the sad ones, they make sense when they're music. Then maybe that's how you should meet your grandparents, Linda suggested. By letting them see the real you, music and all. You're playing at the school concert tomorrow. Why don't we invite them to come? Let them see you shine on your own terms. The suggestion terrified and excited Ethan in equal measure. The thought of performing was already nerve-wracking. He'd only been playing for a few weeks. But there was something appealing about meeting his mother's parents in a moment when he felt strong, doing something he loved. Will you help me practice one more time? He asked Linda. I want to get it perfect. Linda smiled, helping him position the guitar. Remember what Grandpa Joe always said, perfect is boring. Real music comes from the heart. As they worked on a performance piece, a simple but moving arrangement of Amazing Grace that Mr. Rodriguez had helped him adapt, Ethan felt his anxiety about tomorrow beginning to transform into determination. For the first time in his life, he would face his family not as the disappointing heir to the Carter fortune, but as himself, a boy who had found his voice through music. The Pine Grove Elementary Auditorium buzzed with excitement on the evening of the music showcase. Proud parents filled the seats, cameras at the ready, while nervous performers practiced last-minute runs backstage. Ethan sat in his wheelchair near the edge of the stage, Grandpa Joe's guitar across his lap. Try to remember Linda's breathing exercises. Mr. Rodriguez approached, adjusting the microphone stand to the perfect height for Ethan's performance. "How are you feeling, Maestro?" he asked, his warm smile helping to calm Ethan's nerves. "A little scared," Ethan admitted. "What if I mess up? What if they don't like it?" "You know what I think?" Mr. Rodriguez knelt beside him. "I think music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. And you, my friend, have one of the most honest hearts I've ever met." From his position, Ethan could see the Thompson family in the front row, Mike filming with their old video camera, Linda mouthing, "You've got this," and Carlos and Maria holding up a homemade sign decorated with music notes. But his eyes kept drifting to the empty seats they'd reserved, wondering if his maternal grandparents would actually come. The showcase began with the elementary school band, followed by several solo performances. Ethan listened to his classmates play, each bringing their own unique style to their chosen pieces. Miguel performed a spirited trumpet solo, and even though he missed a few notes, his enthusiasm made the audience smile and clap along. As his turn approached, Ethan felt his heart racing. Then, just as Mr. Rodriguez was about to announce his name, movement at the back of the auditorium caught his attention. An older couple was being shown to the reserved seats, the woman's silver hair gleaming under the lights, the man's weathered face bearing a hesitant expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Rodriguez's voice carried through the speakers, "please welcome Ethan Carter, performing his own arrangement of Amazing Grace." Linda had helped him wheel onto the stage earlier, positioning him where the spotlight would catch the natural wood grain of Grandpa Joe's guitar. Now, as all eyes turned to him, Ethan took a deep breath and looked at his guitar instead of the audience. His fingers found the first chord, muscle memory taking over despite his nerves. The notes rang out clear and true, filling the auditorium with their simple beauty. Ethan had practiced this arrangement countless times, but tonight it felt different, more meaningful, more personal. As he played, he dared to glance at his grandparents. His grandmother, his mother's mother, had her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. His grandfather sat rigid, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The melody flowed from his fingers, each note carrying emotions he couldn't express in words, the pain of abandonment, the joy of finding a new family, the hope of connections yet to be made. When he reached the final verse, Ethan did something he hadn't planned. He began to sing. His voice wasn't powerful or trained, but it was sincere. Linda had been helping him practice in secret, showing him how to project from his diaphragm despite his physical challenges. The words took on new meaning as he sang them. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I've already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." The last note faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, from the silence, erupted thunderous applause. The entire auditorium rose to their feet, led by Carlos and Maria, who were practically jumping with excitement. But Ethan barely registered the standing ovation. His eyes were fixed on his maternal grandparents, who were both openly weeping now. As Mr. Rodriguez helped wheel him off stage, Ethan could hear snippets of conversation from the audience. Incredible. Such emotion. Who taught him to play like that? The praise felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of performing. Backstage, the Thompson family surrounded him with hugs and congratulations. "That was amazing," Carlos exclaimed, practically bouncing. "You didn't tell us you were going to sing, too." "I wasn't sure I would," Ethan admitted, still breathless from performance. "It just felt right in the moment." Linda knelt beside his wheelchair, her eyes glistening with proud tears. "Your voice was beautiful. Honey, and did you see?" They came. Before Ethan could respond, Mr. Rodriguez appeared with a gentle smile. "Ethan, there are some people who would very much like to meet you. If you're ready." Ethan's heart began racing again, but this time it wasn't stage fright. He looked at Linda, who squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We'll be right here if you need us." His maternal grandparents were waiting in the music room, away from the crowd. His grandmother, he didn't even know her name yet, had his mother's eyes, according to few photographs he'd managed to see over the years. His grandfather stood tall but gentle, his weathered face marked by years of emotion. Ethan, his grandmother breathed, taking a hesitant step forward. You look so much like Elizabeth, like your mother. The comparison startled him. No one had ever told him that before. His father had always changed the subject whenever Ethan asked about his mother's appearance. I'm Grace, his grandmother continued, her voice tender. And this is your grandfather, Robert. We've waited so long to meet you. Why? Ethan's voice caught. He gripped the armrest of his wheelchair, forcing himself to continue. Why didn't you try to find me before? Robert stepped forward, his expression pained. We did, son. For years we tried. Your father's lawyers blocked every attempt. We wrote letters, hired investigators, filed court petitions. But Daniel Carter's influence, it was like fighting a brick wall. We never stopped thinking about you, Grace added, moving closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. Ethan felt the room spin as the words sank in. His father, the man who had abandoned him on that deserted road, now wanted him back. The guitar in his lap suddenly felt heavy, the melody he'd been working on now a distant memory. He can't do that, can he? Ethan asked, his voice trembling. After everything he did? Grace and Robert exchanged worried glances, while Linda and Mike looked equally concerned. We need to call Miss Carter, Linda said firmly, already reaching for her phone. She'll know what to do. Miss Carter arrived within the hour, her usual warm demeanor replaced by a serious expression as she reviewed the legal documents. This is a complicated situation, she admitted, looking up from the papers. Your father's lawyers are claiming that he never intended to abandon you, that it was a misunderstanding. They're arguing that he's your legal guardian and has the right to have you returned to his care. But that's not true. Ethan burst out, his hands gripping the armrest of his wheelchair. He left me there. He told me the Carter name wasn't meant for someone like me. Miss Carter nodded sympathetically. I believe you, Ethan, but the court will need evidence to support your side of the story. We'll need to present everything we have. Your testimony, the gas station security footage, and any other documentation that shows his actions were intentional. Grace leaned forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. We have letters, years of letters we wrote trying to reach Ethan. We hired investigators, filed petitions. If that doesn't show his father's intent to keep us away, I don't know what does. Robert added, and we have a recording Elizabeth made for Ethan. It shows how much she loved him, how she wanted him to be happy and free to pursue his passions. That's not the kind of life Daniel Carter was offering. Miss Carter made notes as they spoke. All of that will help. But we also need to show that Ethan is thriving here, that be with the Thompsons, and having a relationship with you is in his best interest. The court will consider his well-being above all else. Ethan looked around the room at the people who had become his family. Linda, Mike, Carlos, Maria, Grace, and Robert. They had given him a home, a sense of belonging, and the freedom to discover who he was. The thought of being taken away from them, of returning to the cold, sterile life he'd known before, filled him with dread. I don't want to go back, Ethan said quietly but firmly. This is my home now. These are my people. Linda knelt beside him, placing a hand on his arm. We're not going to let him take you, Ethan. We'll fight this together. You're not alone anymore. Over the next few days, the household became a hub of activity as they prepared for the custody hearing. Miss Carter worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and preparing their case. Grace and Robert shared their collection of letters and legal documents, while Linda and Mike provided records of Ethan's progress since coming to live with them, his school achievements, his music performances, and emotional growth they'd witnessed. Ethan, meanwhile, poured his feelings into his music. He worked on his mother's song, adding his own verse to express his journey and his hopes for the future. The lyrics came to him late one night, as he sat by the window with Grandpa Joe's guitar. Asterisk through the darkness, I found my way, with love that guides me every day. No matter what the future brings, I'll rise above and let my heart sing. Asterisk, when the day of the hearing arrived, Ethan felt a mix of fear and determination. The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings and solemn atmosphere. But as he looked around at the people who had come to support him, Linda, Mike, Carlos, Maria, Grace, Robert, and even Mr. Rodriguez, he felt a surge of strength, The hearing was tense. Daniel Carter's lawyers argued that he had never intended to abandon Ethan, that it had been a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. They painted a picture of a grieving father who had made a mistake, but was now ready to provide for his son. But when it was their turn, Miss Carter presented their case with precision and passion. She showed the gas station footage, read excerpts from Grace and Robert letters, and played Elizabeth's recording. Finally, she called Ethan to the stand. As he answered the questions, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. He spoke honestly about his experiences, the loneliness of his life before, the pain of being abandoned, and the joy he'd found with the Thompsons and his grandparents. When asked what he wanted, his answer was clear. I want to stay with my family, the people who love me for who I am, not for what they want me to be. The judge took time to deliberate, and the wait felt endless. But when the verdict came, it was everything Ethan had hoped for. The court ruled in his favor, granting permanent custody to the Thompsons and ensuring his continued relationship with Grace and Robert. As they left the courtroom, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was free to live his life, to make music, and to be surrounded by the love of his chosen family. That night, as they gathered at the Thompson home to celebrate, Ethan played his mother's song, now complete with his own verse. The music filled the room, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. But also Sarah, Jim, Grace, Robert, Carlos, Maria, and Mr. Rodriguez standing in the doorway, their faces filled with emotion. They had quietly gathered to listen, drawn by the music that had become a testament to Thomas's journey. Dr. Chin wiped her eyes, clearly moved. Thomas, she said softly, that was extraordinary. You've not only found your voice, but you've also created something beautiful from your experiences. This is exactly the kind of growth and resilience the court needs to see. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling with pride. Thomas, you've shown us all what it means to turn pain into something meaningful. Your mother will be so proud of you. Grace and Robert nodded, their eyes glistening with tears. Elizabeth's spirit lives on in you, Grace said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. You've taken her love and made it your own. Thomas looked around at the people who had become his family, feeling a deep sense of belonging. I couldn't have done it without all of you, he said. You showed me that I'm not broken, that I'm just different, and that's okay. Dr. Chin smiled warmly. Thomas, your courage and creativity speak volumes. I'll make sure the court understands how much you've grown and how important this family is to you. No one can take that away from you. As the group gathered around him, Thomas felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. The music had not only connected him to his mother, but had also given him the strength to face his father's attempts to control his life. He knew the legal battle wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He had a family, both by blood and by choice, who loved him unconditionally and would stand by him no matter what. That evening, as the sun set and the house filled with accompanying sounds of laughter and conversation, Thomas sat by the window with Papa Joe's guitar. He strummed softly, adding a new verse to his mother's song, a verse about finding home, not in a place, but in the people who love you for who you are. Asterisk, through the storms, I found my way with love that guides me every day. No matter where the path may lead, I'll rise above, my heart will sing. Asterisk, the music carried to the house, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, love and resilience could create something beautiful. And for the first time in his life, Thomas felt truly free. Thomas, she said gently, do you know why we chose you for this concert series? He shook his head, still focused on the tricky chord progression. It's not just because of your talent, though that's undeniable. It's because your story, your music, shows that art isn't about perfection. It's about connection, resilience, and finding beauty in the unexpected. That's what makes your performance so powerful. Her words stayed with him as he continued to practice, reminding him that this wasn't just about proving himself to his father or the court. It was about sharing his journey, his mother's legacy, and the love that had carried him through. The day of the court hearing arrived, and with it, a mix of nerves and determination. Thomas, dressed in a crisp shirt and tie, sat between Sarah and Jim in the courtroom. Grace and Robert were there too, along with Miss Thompson, who had prepared meticulously for this moment. Richard Parker's legal team presented their case, arguing that Thomas's abandonment had been a misunderstanding and that he was now ready to provide a stable home. But when it was their turn, Ms. Thompson presented Dr. Chen's report, the gas station footage, and the heartfelt letters from Grace and Robert. She also played a recording of Thomas's song, the one he had adapted from his mother's melody. The judge listened intently, her expression thoughtful. When it was time for Thomas to speak, he took a deep breath and addressed the court. "I don't want to go back to the life I had before," he said, his voice steady. "I've found a family who loves me for who I am, not for what they want me to be. And I found my voice through music. Please let me stay where I belong." The judge's decision came quickly. She ruled in favor of the Thompsons, granting them permanent custody and ensuring Thomas's continued relationship with Grace and Robert. Richard Parker's petition was denied. As they left the courtroom, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was free to live his life, to make music, and to be surrounded by the love of his chosen family. The night of the concert arrived, and the Central City Concert Hall was filled with an electric energy. Backstage, Thomas adjusted his guitar, his heart pounding with excitement and nerves. Sarah, Jim, Grace, Robert, Carlos, Maria, and Mr. Rodriguez were all there, offering words of encouragement. When it was his turn to perform, Thomas wheeled onto the stage, the spotlight shining down on him. He took a deep breath and began to play, his mother's melody flowing through his fingers. As he transitioned into his own composition, the audience was captivated by the emotional depth and beauty of the music. The final notes hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation that filled the hall with warmth and admiration. Thomas looked out at the sea of faces, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. As he left the stage, his family surrounded him, their faces glowing with pride and love. "You did it, Thomas," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "You showed the world who you are." And in that moment, Thomas knew he had found his place, not just in music, but in the hearts of the people who loved him. His journey wasn't over, but he had found his voice, his family, and his truth. And that was more than enough. Richard Parker sat stiffly on the other side of the room, his lawyers flanking him like sentinels. The tension in the air was palpable as Judge Watson took her seat and addressed the room. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice calm but authoritative. "This is a difficult case, but my primary concern is Thomas's well-being and future. I've had the opportunity to speak with him privately, and I must say his clarity and resilience are remarkable." She paused, glancing at Thomas before continuing. "Based on the evidence presented, including Dr. Chen's evaluation, the testimony of the Martinez family, and Thomas's own words, it is clear to me that his current living situation provides the love, support, and opportunities he needs to thrive. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the Thompson petition for permanent custody. Richard Parker's request for custody reinstatement is denied." The room erupted in quiet murmurs, but Thomas barely heard them. He felt a wave of relief wash over him, mingled with a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had stood by him. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with tears. Grace and Robert exchanged a look of quiet triumph, while Carlos and Maria grinned from ear to ear. Richard Parker's face was unreadable, but his lawyers quickly began gathering their papers, their expressions grim. As the judge adjourned the hearing, Thomas caught his father's "I won last time." There was no anger or resentment in Thomas's gaze, just a quiet determination to move forward. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, as if celebrating the victory. The Martinez family and Grace and Robert surrounded Thomas, their joy and relief palpable. "You did it, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice filled with pride. "You stood up for yourself and showed everyone who you really are." Thomas smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," he said. "You showed me that I'm not alone." As they prepared to leave, Thomas noticed his father standing a short distance away, watching them. For a moment, their eyes met, and Thomas felt a pang of sadness, not for himself, but for the man who had chosen to walk away from the love and connection they could have shared. "Thomas," Richard Parker called out, his voice hesitant. I'd like to come to your concert, if that's all right." Thomas considered the request, his heart steady. "You can come he said finally, "but not because I need your approval. I want you to see who I am and who I'm becoming. Whether you understand it or not, that's up to you." Richard nodded, his expression unreadable, before turning and walking away. The days leading up to the concert were a whirlwind of preparation and excitement. Thomas spent hours in the studio, perfecting the blend of his mother's recorded voice and his own live performance. The Tribune article had sparked a wave of interest, and tickets to the concert sold out quickly. People were drawn not just to the music, but to the story behind it. A story of resilience, love, and the power of finding one's voice. On the night of the concert, the Central City Concert Hall was filled to capacity. Backstage, Thomas adjusted his guitar, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Sarah, Jim, Grace, Robert, Carlos, Maria, and Mr. Rodriguez were all there, offering words of encouragement and support. When it was time, Thomas wheeled onto the stage, the spotlight shining down on him. The audience fell silent as he began to play, his mother's melody flowing through his fingers. As he transitioned into his own composition, the room was captivated by the emotional depth and beauty of the music. When Elizabeth's recorded voice joined his, the effect was magical, a conversation between mother and son, bridging past and present. The final notes hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation that filled the hall with warmth and admiration. Thomas looked out at the sea of faces, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. As he left the stage, his family surrounded him, their faces glowing with pride and love. "You did it, Thomas," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "You showed the world who you are." And in that moment, Thomas knew he had found his place, not just in music, but in the hearts of the people who loved him. His journey wasn't over, but he had found his voice, his family, and his truth. And that was more than enough. It's with the Martinezes, with Grace and Robert, with my friends at school, and even, maybe someday, with my father, if he chooses to be part of it. But no matter what, I know who I am now, and that's enough. The night before the concert, Thomas lay in bed, his mind racing with thoughts of the performance. He thought about his mother, Elizabeth, and how her love had reached across time to guide him. He thought about the Martinezes, who had shown him what it meant to be part of family. And he thought about his father, who had yet to understand that love wasn't about control. It was about acceptance. The next evening, the Central City Concert Hall was alive with energy. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their excitement palpable as they took their seats. Backstage, Thomas adjusted his guitar, his heart pounding, but his mind clear. Sarah, Jim, Grace, Robert, Carlos, Maria, and Mr. Rodriguez were all there, offering their final words of encouragement. "Remember," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "this is your moment. You've already won by being here, by being yourself." Thomas nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready." As the house lights dimmed, Thomas wheeled onto the stage, the spotlight illuminating him and Papa Joe's guitar. The audience fell silent, their attention focused entirely on him. He began to play, his mother's melody filling the hall with its haunting beauty. When Elizabeth's recorded voice joined his, the effect was magical, a duet across time, a conversation between mother and son. As Thomas transitioned into his own composition, the music swelled, carrying the weight of his journey, the pain, the hope, the love. The audience was captivated, their emotions rising and falling with the notes. When the final chord rang out, the hall was silent for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then the applause began, building into a thunderous standing ovation. Thomas looked out at the sea of faces, his heart swelling with gratitude. In the front row, he saw Sarah, Jim, Grace, Robert, Carlos, and Maria, their faces glowing with pride. And then, in the shadows of the third row, he saw his father. Richard Parker sat quietly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glistened with something Thomas couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or the first stirrings of understanding. As the applause continued, Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had found his voice, his family, and his truth. And no matter what the future held, he knew he would always have the music and the love that had carried him through. The concert ended, but the journey was far from over. As Thomas left the stage, surrounded by the people who loved him, he knew that this was just the beginning. He had a song to sing, a story to tell, and a life to live on his own terms. And that was more than enough. Backstage, Thomas sat in his wheelchair, his hands resting on Papa Joe's guitar. The familiar weight of the instrument grounded him. Its polish was catching the soft glow of the stage lights. Around him, the Martinez family, Grace, Robert, and Mr. Rodriguez stood quietly, their presence a steady source of comfort. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked softly, her hand resting on his shoulder. Thomas nodded, his heart pounding but his mind clear. "I'm ready." As the house lights dimmed, the audience fell silent, their attention focused entirely on the stage. The spotlight illuminated Thomas as he wheeled into position, the guitar resting across his lap. The screen behind him flickered to life, showing a video of his mother, Elizabeth, seated at a piano, her face glowing with joy. "Hi, little one." Her voice echoed through the hall, clear and musical. "I don't know if you'll be a boy or a girl, but I already know you'll be perfect, exactly as you are." The audience was captivated, their emotions rising and falling with the notes. When Thomas began to play, his mother's melody filled the hall, its haunting beauty resonating with every soul in the room. As he transitioned into his own composition, the music swelled, carrying the weight of his journey, the pain, the hope, the love. When Elizabeth's recorded voice joined his, the effect was magical, a duet across time, a conversation between mother and son. The audience was spellbound, their emotions rising and falling with the notes. As the final chord rang out, the hall was silent for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then, the applause began, building into a thunderous standing ovation. Thomas looked out at the sea of faces, his heart swelling with gratitude. In the front row, he saw Sarah, Jim, Grace, Robert, Carlos, and Maria, their faces glowing with pride. And then, in the shadows of the third row, he saw his father. Richard Parker sat quietly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glistened with something Thomas couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or the first stirrings of understanding. As the applause continued, Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had found his voice, his family, and his truth. And no matter what the future held, he knew he would always have the music and the love that had carried him through. The concert ended, but the journey was far from over. As Thomas left the stage, surrounded by the people who loved him, he knew that this was just the beginning. He had a song to sing, a story to tell, and a life to live on his own terms. And that was more than enough. The recording began to play, and once again, the room was filled with the haunting beauty of Thomas's performance. As his mother's voice joined his guitar, the magic of their duet filled the space, creating a connection that transcended time and distance. Thomas watched his father's face as the music played, seeing the emotions flicker across it. Regret, sorrow, and finally, a glimmer of understanding. When the recording ended, Richard sat in silence for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Thomas," he said finally, his voice trembling, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it. I want to be part of your life, not as a man who tried to control you, but as someone who supports you, who listens to you, who learns from you." Thomas looked at his father, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "It's not going to be easy," he said softly. "But if you're willing to try, so am I." Richard nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I am. I want to be better, for you and for Elizabeth." Sarah stepped forward, her hand resting on Thomas's shoulder. "We're all here to support you, Thomas. And if your father is serious about being part of your life, he'll have to earn his place, just like the rest of us did." Grace and Robert exchanged a look, their expressions a mix of hope and caution. "We'll take it one step at a time," Grace said gently. "But tonight, let's celebrate Thomas's incredible achievement." The room filled with warmth and laughter as the group celebrated Thomas's success. The concert had been more than just a performance. It had been a turning point, a moment of healing and connection. As the night wore on, Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had found his voice, his family, and his truth. And no matter what the future held, he knew he would always have the music and the love that carried him through. The journey wasn't over, but Thomas was ready to face whatever came next, knowing he had the support of the people who loved him. And as he looked around the room at the faces of his family and friends, he realized that this was what true harmony felt like, different notes coming together to create something beautiful, something whole. And that was more than enough. She looked up as they entered, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "You're Thomas," she said, her voice soft but filled with excitement. "I watched your concert. Your song, it made me feel like I wasn't alone." Thomas smiled, feeling a surge of connection. "I'm glad it helped," he said, positioning his wheelchair so he could face her. "I brought my guitar. Would you like to hear some music?" Jamie nodded eagerly, her hands clasping the edge of her blanket. "Can you play the song you wrote with your mom?" "Of course," Thomas said, carefully lifting Papa Joe's guitar from its case. He adjusted the straps and positioned the instrument across his lap, his fingers finding the familiar strings. As he began to play, the room filled with the haunting beauty of his mother's melody. When Elizabeth's recorded voice joined his guitar, Jamie's eyes widened in awe. "That's your mom?" she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Thomas nodded, his fingers continuing to move across the strings. "Yes, she wrote this song for me before I was born. It's like she's still here, talking to me through the music." Jamie listened intently, her expression softening as the music washed over her. When the song ended, she looked at Thomas with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said. "It feels like she's telling me it's going to be okay." Thomas smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. That's what music does. It connects us even when we feel alone. Over the next hour, Thomas played several more songs, some from his mother's journal and others he had written himself. Jamie joined in, singing along when she knew the words and even trying to strum a guitar under Thomas's guidance. The room, once filled with the sterile sounds of hospital equipment, now resonated with laughter and music. As the session came to an end, Dr. Chen approached Thomas with a grateful smile. "This was incredible," she said. "Jamie hasn't smiled like that in weeks. You have a gift, Thomas, and it's making a real difference." Thomas felt a warm glow of pride. "Thank you. I want to keep doing this, helping other kids find their voice through music." Sarah and Jim exchanged proud glances. "We'll support you every step of the way," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. As they left the hospital, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The music that had once been his refuge was now becoming a source of healing for others. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He had his family, his friends, and the memory of his mother guiding him. That evening, as the sun set in a house filled with the comforting sounds of laughter and conversation, Thomas sat by the window with Papa Joe's guitar. He strummed softly, adding a new verse to his mother's song, a verse about finding home, not in a place, but in the people who love you for who you are. Asterisk, through the storms, I found my way with love that guides me every day. No matter where the path may lead, I'll rise above, my heart will sing. Asterisk, the music carried through the house, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, love and resilience could create something beautiful. And for the first time in his life, Thomas felt truly free. Thomas nodded, his fingers resting lightly on the strings of Papa Joe's guitar. "Exactly," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We're showing the world that different doesn't mean less. It just means finding your own way to shine." The room buzzed with energy as the children continued to play, their laughter and music blending together in a symphony of joy and resilience. Thomas looked around at the faces of his friends and fellow musicians, each one a testament to the power of music to transform lives. As the session came to an end, Thomas gathered everyone for a final song. "This one's for all of us," he said, strumming the opening chords of their anthem, the song he and Jamie had created together. The room filled with the sound of their voices and instruments, a chorus of different abilities coming together to create something beautiful. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause, not just from the children and their families, but from the hospital staff and visitors who had gathered to listen. Thomas felt a surge of pride and gratitude, knowing that they were making a difference, one note at a time. As they packed up their instruments and prepared to leave, Jamie approached Thomas with a smile. "Thanks for everything," she said. "You've changed my life." Thomas smiled back, his heart full. "We change each other's lives," he said. "That's what music does. It connects us, helps us find our voice, and reminds us that we're never alone." As they left the hospital, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The music that had once been his refuge was now becoming a source of healing and hope for others. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He had his family, his friends, and the memory of his mother guiding him. That evening, as the sun set in a house filled with accompanying sounds of laughter and conversation, Thomas sat by the window with Papa Joe's guitar. He strummed softly, adding a new verse to his mother's song, a verse about finding home, not in a place, but in the people who love you for who you are. Asterisk, through the storms, I found my way with love that guides me every day. No matter where the path may lead, I'll rise above, my heart will sing. Asterisk, the music carried to the house, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, love and resilience could create something beautiful. And for the first time in his life, Thomas felt truly free. He strummed the opening chords of his mother's song, the melody that had started it all. As he played, the screen behind him came to life, showing images of the Foundation's journey. Therapy sessions, small performances, moments of breakthrough and joy. The children watched in awe, their faces lighting up with recognition and hope. "This piece," Thomas announced, "is called Different Voices, One Song. It's dedicated to everyone who helped us find our way to this moment. Our families, our teachers, our doctors and therapists. But most of all, it's dedicated to those who are still searching for their voice. We want you to know that there's a place for you in this symphony." The music began softly, with Jamie's keyboard introducing the theme they developed from her original poem. Thomas's guitar joined in, adding layers of harmony that spoke of challenge and triumph. One by one, other young musicians in the program added their parts. Michael's drums, Sarah's synthesizer, and a dozen other adapted instruments, each contributing its unique voice to the whole. As they played, Thomas felt the presence of all those who had brought him to this moment. He felt Sarah's unwavering support in every note, heard Mr. Rodriguez's encouraging words in every chord progression. He sensed his mother's love flowing through the melody and Papa Joe's spirit in the guitar's warm tones. The piece built to a crescendo, each different voice rising and falling in perfect harmony, demonstrating that music knew no boundaries of ability or circumstance. When the final notes faded away, the audience erupted in thunderous applause, many rising to their feet in celebration. Dr. Chun, who had supported the program from its inception, took the stage to make an announcement. Thanks to the success of this program, Central City Children's Hospital is establishing a permanent center for music therapy and adaptive arts. And I'm thrilled to announce that Thomas Parker will serve as our youth program director, helping us develop new ways to bring music into the healing process. The news drew fresh applause, but Thomas was focused on the faces of his students, past and present, each one representing a story of discovery and triumph. Jamie was crying happy tears, her keyboard still under her fingers like an old friend. Michael beamed from behind his drums, while Sarah's smile could have lit up the entire auditorium. After the ceremony, as families mingled and celebrated, Richard Parker approached his son. "Your mother," he said softly, "would be so proud of what you created here, not just the music, but the way you helped others find their strength through it." Thomas looked around at what they had built together, not just a program or a foundation, but a community where difference was celebrated and every voice mattered. "We all did this," he replied. "Everyone who believed in the power of music to heal and connect." Sarah joined them, carrying a surprise, a beautifully bound book containing letters from children and families whose lives have been touched by the program. "Your story inspired all of this," she said, handing Thomas the book. "But now it's become so much bigger than one story. It's become a symphony of hope." As the celebration continued around them, Thomas opened the book, reading messages of gratitude and inspiration. Each letter represented a life changed, a voice discovered, a bridge built through music. Papa Joe's guitar rested in his lap, its well-worn surface reflecting the lights of the auditorium, an instrument that had helped him find his voice, now helping others find theirs. The Foundation's work was really just beginning, but looking at the joy in the room, Thomas knew they were on the right path. His mother's song had shown him the way, and now he was helping others write their own melodies, proving that every voice, no matter how different, had the power to create something beautiful. 18 months after that first life-changing concert, Thomas found himself back on the desert road where his journey had begun. The location, once a symbol of abandonment, was now transformed. A modern building stood proudly against the desert backdrop. The Elizabeth Parker Center for Adaptive Music and Arts, the Foundation's first dedicated facility. "It's perfect," Sarah said softly, watching Thomas take in the completed building. The center had been his idea, a place where children with different abilities could come for intensive music programs, regardless of their financial situation. The location, challenging as it was emotionally, had been his choice, too. "This way," he had explained to the foundation board, "every child who feels lost or different will know there's a place where they belong. Right here, where I thought everything was ending, new beginnings can start." The grand opening was scheduled for tomorrow, but today was special for another reason. Thomas had organized a private concert for a very specific audience. Children from local foster homes and group homes, each one facing their own challenges and feelings of displacement. They're arriving. Carlos called from the entrance. Now 14, he had become one of the Foundation's most dedicated young volunteers, along with Maria, who ran their social media outreach. The buses pulled up, and children of various ages and abilities began filing into the center. Thomas wheeled to the entrance to greet them, Papa Joe's guitar across his lap. The instrument, though still his most treasured possession, now bore the loving marks of hundreds of therapy sessions and performances. "Welcome to your home for music," he announced, his voice strong and clear. "Here, there's no wrong way to make music, no wrong way to be yourself. We're all different, and that's what makes our symphony beautiful." The main performance space had been designed with input from Thomas and his students. Adaptive equipment was seamlessly integrated into the architecture, making it feel natural rather than medical. The walls featured art created by program participants, and a special display honored Elizabeth Parker's original vision of inclusive music education. As the children settled in, Thomas noticed their expressions, the same mix of uncertainty and hope he had seen in so many faces at the hospital. He began with the story they had come to hear, the one that had led to this moment. 2 years ago, I sat in this very spot, though it looked very different then. I thought I was alone, that being different meant being less. But I discovered something incredible. Our differences are what make our music unique. Michael had become a renowned percussionist, performing with adaptive orchestras around the world. Sarah's compositions have been featured in major music festivals, showcasing the beauty of adaptive music to global audiences. And Thomas, though still young, had become a symbol of resilience and creativity, inspiring countless others to find their own voices. As Thomas played, the screen behind him displayed images of the Foundation's journey. Therapy sessions, small performances, moments of breakthrough and joy. The children watched in awe, their faces lighting up with recognition and hope. "This piece," Thomas announced, "is called Different Voices, One Song. It's dedicated to everyone who helped us find our way to this moment. Our families, our teachers, our doctors and therapists. But most of all, it's dedicated to those who are still searching for their voice. We want you to know that there's a place for you in this symphony." The music began softly, with Jamie's keyboard introducing the theme they developed from her original poem. Thomas's guitar joined in, adding layers of harmony that spoke of challenge and triumph. One by one, other young musicians in the program added their parts. Michael's drums, Sarah's synthesizer, and a dozen other adapted instruments, each contributing its unique voice to the whole. As they played, Thomas felt the presence of all those who had brought him to this moment. He felt Sarah's unwavering support in every note, heard Mr. Rodriguez's encouraging words in every chord progression. He sensed his mother's love flowing through the melody and Papa Joe's spirit in the guitar's warm tones. The piece built to a crescendo, each different voice rising and falling in perfect harmony, demonstrating that music knew no boundaries of ability or circumstance. When the final notes faded away, the audience erupted in thunderous applause, many rising to their feet in celebration. Dr. Chun, who had supported the program from its inception, took the stage to make an announcement. Thanks to the success of this program, Central City Children's Hospital is establishing a permanent center for music therapy and adaptive arts. And I'm thrilled to announce that Thomas Parker will serve as our youth program director, helping us develop new ways to bring music into the healing process. The news drew fresh applause, but Thomas was focused on the faces of his students, past and present, each one representing a story of discovery and triumph. Jamie was crying happy tears, her keyboard still under her fingers like an old friend. Michael beamed from behind his drums, while Sarah's smile could have lit up the entire auditorium. After the ceremony, as families mingled and celebrated, Richard Parker approached his son. "Your mother," he said softly, "would be so proud of what you created here. Not just the music, but the way you've helped others find their strength through it." Thomas looked around at what they had built together. Not just a program or a foundation, but a community where difference was celebrated and every voice mattered. "We all did this," he replied. Everyone who believed in the power of music to heal and connect. Sarah joined them, carrying a surprise, a beautifully bound book containing letters from children and families whose lives have been touched by the program. "Your story inspired all of this," she said, handing Thomas the book. "But now it's become so much bigger than one story. It's become a symphony of hope." As the celebration continued around them, Thomas opened the book, reading messages of gratitude and inspiration. Each letter represented a life changed, a voice discovered, a bridge built through music. Papa Joe's guitar rested in his lap, its well-worn surface reflecting the lights of the auditorium, an instrument that had helped him find his voice, now helping others find theirs. The foundation's work was really just beginning. But looking at the joy in the room, Thomas knew they were on the right path. His mother's song had shown him the way, and now he was helping others write their own melodies, proving that every voice, no matter how different, had the power to create something beautiful. 18 months after that first life-changing concert, Thomas found himself back on the desert road where his journey had begun. The location, once a symbol of abandonment, was now transformed. A modern building stood proudly against the desert backdrop. The Elizabeth Parker Center for Adaptive Music and Arts, the Foundation's first dedicated facility. "It's perfect," Sarah said softly, watching Thomas take in the completed building. The center had been his idea, a place where children with different abilities could come for intensive music programs, regardless of their financial situation. The location, challenging as it was emotionally, had been his choice, too. "This way," he had explained to the Foundation board. "Every child who feels lost or different will know there's a place where they belong. Right here, where I thought everything was ending, new beginnings can start." The grand opening was scheduled for tomorrow, but today was special for another reason. Thomas had organized a private concert for a very specific audience. Children from local foster homes and group homes, each one facing their own challenges and feelings of displacement. Their arriving, Carlos called from the entrance. Now 14, he had become one of the Foundation's most dedicated young volunteers, along with Maria, who ran their social media outreach. The buses pulled up, and children of various ages and abilities began filing into the center. Thomas wheeled to the entrance to greet them, Papa Joe's guitar across his lap. The instrument, though still his most treasured possession, now bore the loving marks of hundreds of therapy sessions and performances. "Welcome to your home for music," he announced, his voice strong and clear. "Here, there's no wrong way to make music, no wrong way to be yourself. We're all different, and that's what makes our symphony beautiful." The main performance space had been designed with input from Thomas and his students. Adaptive equipment was seamlessly integrated into the architecture, making it feel natural rather than medical. The walls featured art created by program participants, and a special display honored Elizabeth Parker's original vision of inclusive music education. As the children settled in, Thomas noticed their expressions, the same mix of uncertainty and hope he had seen in so many faces at the hospital. He began with the story they had come to hear, the one that had led to this moment. 2 years ago, I sat in this very spot, though it looked very different then. I thought I was alone. That being different meant being less. But I discovered something incredible. Our differences are what make our music unique. The desert wind carried the music into the night, a melody of resilience, love, and hope. It was a song that would continue to grow, reaching new ears and touching new hearts, proving that even in the most unexpected places, beauty could flourish. And as the stars shone brightly above, Thomas knew that his mother's dream had become a reality, a symphony of voices, each one unique, each one essential, coming together to create something truly extraordinary. And as the music faded into the night, Thomas sat quietly, his hands resting on Papa Joe's guitar. He looked around at the faces of his family, both by blood and by choice, and felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had led him here, to this moment, surrounded by love and the promise of a brighter future. The Elizabeth Parker Center for Adaptive Music and Art stood as a testament to the power of resilience and the beauty of difference. It was a place where children from all walks of life could come to find their voice, to discover that their unique way of being was not a limitation, but a gift. And Thomas, once a boy abandoned on a desert road, had become a beacon of hope for countless others. As the stars twinkled above, Thomas thought of his mother Elizabeth and the song she had written for him before he was born. Her love had been the first note in a melody that had grown into something far greater than she could have imagined. It was a melody that would continue to play, carried forward by the children who found their voices at the center, by the families who supported them, and by the world that was learning to listen. The night was quiet now, but the music lingered in the air, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a song waiting to be sung. And as Thomas closed his eyes, he knew that his mother's dream had come true, not just for him, but for all the children who would follow in his footsteps, adding their own unique notes to the symphony of life. The desert wind whispered through the garden, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings, of growth, and of the endless possibilities that come when we dare to embrace our authentic selves. And in that moment, Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude for the love that had carried him through, for the family that had stood by him, and for the music that had given him a voice. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Thomas smiled. The journey was far from over, but he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same courage and determination that had brought him this far. And he would continue to share his song with the world, a melody of hope, healing, and the beauty of being exactly who you are. The desert wind carried the music into the new day, a reminder that even in the most unlikely places, with love, acceptance, and the courage to be yourself, something beautiful can grow. And as the sun rose, casting its golden light over the landscape, Thomas knew that the symphony of hope would continue to play, one note at a time forever.